everyone, and welcome to Books and Chit Chat with Aging and Amazing. Thank you for spending your precious time with us this evening. I'm Marianne Sciucco, a founder and manager of All's Authors, the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. I'd like to introduce some of the members of our team who are with us today. My friend Anne Campanella, a member of the All's Authors management team and board, who is also an acquisitions editor and serves on the custom caregiver collections team. She is co-moderating with me this evening. Hello, Anne.
Hello. Hi, everybody. So glad to have you.
And Allie Parker, Malika's associate. Malika Moore is the owner and founder of Aging and Amazing, and hopefully she will show up this evening for a little bit. Allie is an undergraduate college student at the University of Maryland studying psychology and is about to graduate. She plans to go into mental health therapy and has a special interest in the older adult population. So welcome to members of Aging and Amazing and All's Authors. Some housekeeping. The event is being recorded and we will post the recording to our YouTube channel, and we will also produce it for our podcast. So you can listen to it again if you want or share it with your friends. The podcast is called Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia. You can listen to it on all the major podcast sites like Apple and Spotify, and you can find it on our website, allsauthors.com. If you want to know when the replay becomes available, check your email. The announcement will be made in our weekly newsletter. If you don't see it, please check your spam or email us at allsauthors@gmail.com. And if we don't have you on our mailing list, you may sign up on our website, allsauthors.com, or watch for it on the book club channel. Malika is here. Hello, Malika.
Yeah, hi, everyone.
Malika is the founder and the owner of Aging and Amazing. So be sure to check out agingamazing.com. I think we're ready, so let's get started with our presentation. Tonight we have a special presentation in celebration of National Poetry Month, featuring 4 of our authors who have published poetry on the dementia journey. All of these authors are prolific and accomplished, and we are thrilled to have them with us tonight. Please welcome Daniel Potts, a neurologist, poet, and photographer who has published several volumes of poetry as well as a caregiver guide co-written with his wife, Ellen. His most recent book is Bringing Art to Life, Reflections on Dementia and the Transforming Power of Art and Relationships. Dan's work is inspired by his father, Lester, who became an acclaimed watercolor artist while in the throes of Alzheimer's. You can find more about Dan at his website, danielcpotts.wordpress.com, which you can listen to on our podcast or view on YouTube. Margaret Stawowy is the editor of Storms of the Inland Sea, Poems of Alzheimer's and Dementia Caregiving with Jim Kokos, as well as 2 other volumes of poetry. She was instrumental on bringing the poets together for our Poetry for the Dementia Journey event last year, which you can listen to on our podcast or view on YouTube. Find her at margaretstawowy.weebly.com. And we're going to have all of these authors' website and information in the show notes when we publish this replay, so you can get them there. Sherri Levine is the author of several poetry books, including Stealing Flowers from the Neighbors and A Joy to See, ekphrastic poetry based on the artwork of Kay Levine, her mother, who succumbed to Alzheimer's. Sherri has an extensive list of accomplishments as a poet and editor. Find her at sherrilevine.com. And Sue Fagalde is also with us. She is the author of several books of poetry, including Gravel Road Ahead and the upcoming memoir, No Way Out of This, written from her experience caring for her husband with Alzheimer's. She's currently pulling together our poetry anthology, which will release on June 1st and is currently available on Amazon for pre-order. All right, so now I want to get started with our discussion here. And all of the poets on this page have all had their very own dementia journey, and that's where we want to start and talk about a little bit about your journey and how poetry may have impacted that, whether or not you were writing or reading poetry at the time, or maybe it was something that you picked up later on. A lot of people tend to want to write about their experience when it's over. We can start with you, Dan, if you want to tell us a little bit about that. And I always like to ask you to just say a little bit of something, what it was like to be a doctor diagnosing people with Alzheimer's and dementia, and then having to deal with it yourself in your private life.
Thank you so much, Marianne, and everybody for letting me be part of this wonderful event. So it's really a pleasure to be here. So yeah, a neurologist who's also writing poetry, who's also a care partner. It's an interesting sort of combination of things. My inspiration for writing is my father, Lester, who had Alzheimer's disease. Became, I guess, who always was, and we didn't know it, a watercolor artist who grows and paints and he never painted before. So this speaks a little bit to how the artistic creativity of one person can ignite another's creative fire, if you will. I was a neurologist who was struggling through, as an only child, Dad's illness and trying to help Mother as best I could and advise her. And at that time in my life, the youngish neurologist who didn't have any personal experience with dementia other than my patients, I felt ill-prepared. And so I was struggling myself, feeling inadequate to really be the kind of care partner I wanted to be and help to advise my mother. So fortunately, I'm compacting this, Marianne, but fortunately, Dad was able to enroll in a daycare program in our town, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And it's a wonderful program. Dad really found himself there. Dad was a retired artist and learned to paint watercolors. And he really found his voice there. And again, he never painted before. Before we knew it, we had 100 original watercolor pieces over 4 years. Some of the most amazing things I've ever seen. So I, going through a very dark time, was literally inspired and buoyed out of my heart by the person living with dementia. And so I began to wake up in the middle of the night and look at some of Dad's paintings and think about things, process things. And the first night I wrote a poem was December 31st, 2005. It literally came out by itself. So I showed it to my wife the next morning very early. I said, Ellen, I wrote a poem, look. She said, it's great, honey. She read it. She said, you sure you wrote that? I said, yeah, I wrote it. But the public is unrecognizable. So that was the first thing. So that was my dementia journey. So that was really, as a neurologist care partner, my father was doing his own artistic gift in the throes of the disease.
That's such a beautiful story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sherri, would you like to share your story?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Anne. I'm so honored to be here. And I just want to thank my family and my friends for being here. I'm so appreciative of them coming. So I was very close to my mother, and she was an artist. As you can see, the painting behind me was her painting. And so we're from upstate New York, and I live in Portland, and I wanted her to move out to Portland. We could be close. So several years into while she was in Portland, I noticed that she was forgetting things more than usual. And then I took her she got a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And it was very painful because we were very close. And one day she didn't know who I was. And I was distraught, but I've always been a poet. And while I was writing my own poetry book, she got the diagnosis and she was dying. And all the poems about my mom flowed out. They all flowed out. And that is my journey. And so I'm looking forward to sharing with the poems with you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Sherri.
Sue, can you tell us a little about your story?
My husband showed up with Alzheimer's in about 2002. We started noticing problems, although it took a couple of years to get a diagnosis. I've been a forgetful guy. He's the kind of guy who had notes all over the place, and if he didn't take his calendar with him to work, he didn't know what was going on. But we just thought that was charming. Yeah, so he went into Alzheimer's. He was home with me for 7 years, and then 2 years in 4 different nursing homes. And it was long, hard journey, which we had already gone through with my grandfather and a little bit with Fred's father. And I've always been a writer. That's how I deal with things, is I write. So, I was journaling throughout and writing poetry as well. And the month he died was April. It was poetry month. So I was doing a poem a day challenge, and I wrote, even on the day he passed, I wrote a poem. You've got to put it somewhere, and I put it into poetry.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you did. And Margaret, can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah. So I noticed at one point that my mom was very forgetful, and I thought a lot of caregivers are initially in denial, and that was my case. But I soon realized after a bit that this was not a temporary lapse and that it was up to me to keep my mom safe and provide the care she needed. I was working full time and I was pretty much doing this single-handedly, and my mother really didn't have any assets that I could draw upon to get her the help that I felt she needed. So it was a challenging time, and it was hard for me because my mom was always there for me, and it struck me that now she's not, and it's up to me. That's not completely true. Of course, your mother is always there, and I would see her. You could still, she never forgot who I was. And there was a bit of a disagreement about what her diagnosis might have been. I think she had a vascular dementia. And all the time I was writing through this journey. I've been writing poetry for decades. And actually, while I was caregiving, I was writing about my mother, poems, narrative poems, in the voices of my mom's biological parents, adoptive parents. We learned late that my mother was adopted, and this was quite surprising to all of us. But I was also writing poems about caregiving, and I wrote them also after my mother died. And I wanted to put those together, but then I met up with my friend Jim Kokos at a poetry festival. He's the co-editor, and he'd written caregiving poems while he provided care for his father with Alzheimer's. And he was wondering, gee, there must be other people doing this. And I thought, maybe. And he said, we should put a book together. And I thought, somebody must have beat us to this. And I did the research, and I saw that there were anthologies of poetry about dementia, but no anthologies that concentrated on the caregiving journey. I was committed to this because it's one thing to go through your own journey and it's painful, but I wanted the kind of book to come out that I wished I'd had and Jim wished he'd had when we were going through our journey, because it's so lonesome and isolating sometimes to be a caregiver. So the book took on a meaning to me. I could really put myself in it because it was something bigger than myself, and I wanted to help other people. It was a big job, and I'm glad I did it. And I can certainly admire Sue for being the person who put together the All Authors Anthology, which I am very proud to be part of. So thank you to All Authors and to Sue and everyone else who had a hand in producing the All Authors Anthology.
Thank you so much. We're really excited about it. And many of the books that are in the All Authors collection were written by people who couldn't find the book that they wanted, so they decided they were going to write it. And that was like the genesis of so many of the books. And a lot of the books written by people, they'd never written a book before. They won't write a book again. It was just their story, and they managed to put it together and do it well. So I could certainly understand where that came from. I'd like to discuss how poetry can benefit caregivers, whether they read it, listen to it, or write it. Margaret, could you add something to that? What is it about poetry that is beneficial?
Number one, this is a little bit funny, but as a caregiver, your time will be extremely limited, and you might not have time to read a book from beginning to end, but you can pick up a volume of poetry and you can skip through it fate has a way of presenting the poem that you need at that moment. And that's where poetry comes in really handy. It's very precise, very condensed, vivid language that truly hits a core experience. And it's very inspiring. Reading other people's poetry about caregiving of Alzheimer's and dementia, it just was such a comfort to me. And I felt, yeah, there's other people out there. It's not just me. And things that I didn't even realize I was feeling, they would articulate it in their work. Poetry for me is invaluable. It helps me process the world as I write it and also recognize facets of an experience of someone who's going through something similar as I read it.
Yeah, that's illuminating. Sue, did you have something to add?
I think Margaret pretty much said it all, but also if you were wanting to write, caregiving is so all-encompassing of your time and attention. You can do a verse, you can do a line when you have a moment, and you can build on it. But if you just even the idea of writing an essay or something long in a book, forget it. You just don't have the time to think about it. But a poem you can do, and you can say more sometimes in a few lines than you can say in a whole book. You know, the concision and the imagery.
Dan, did you have anything that you want to add about that?
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree with what's been said. And initially, when I started writing poetry, as I said, I was in a dark place, feeling very inadequate, broken, in denial. I didn't feel like I had anybody I could talk to about any of this, although that was not true. I did have, but I was ashamed. And so poetry enabled me to process all of that, sort of pour your hot coffee out on a saucer and blow it and then drink it. So it allowed me to pour all this stuff out and get it out there, but it also allowed me to focus on gratitude. I was having a hard time finding things to be grateful for at the time, but poetry initially allowed me to find these things to be gratitude: people, relationships, flowers, moments from a day. And I would begin to write those down in my phone, on my notes, ideas, things that I saw. I remember one day I saw a guy in the rain on the back of a garbage truck who was picking up the garbage that day. And I became overwhelmed in gratitude for him doing that for us. None of us would want to be out there doing that. And so I jotted that down in my phone. So it was initially about gratitude for me and processing a lot of other emotions.
Wow. Thank you. Sherri, did you have a
Yeah,
thought?
I'd like to say that we turn to poetry at times for sorrow or even for joy. We turn to poetry. Poetry is music, and you don't have to be a poet to write poetry. I teach creative writing at a neighborhood center, and you could just say the rain, and what comes out of that, it's just amazing. So I just want to emphasize, I see a lot of poets in the room, and you don't have to be a poet to write poetry. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherri. Before we start with reading, I wanted to ask my co-host Anne Campanella to tell us a little bit about her story, about her caregiving and her poetry and her comments on that subject.
I would love to share a little bit. I have 2 poetry books about caregiving and my mother's Alzheimer's. She had Alzheimer's for 14 years, and I was the youngest child, but one of the main caregivers in my family. And I, like Sue, I'm a writer, maybe others of you too. This is how I process my life. I've written books. I was a newspaper and magazine writer and editor. And during this period of my mom's Alzheimer's, poems just poured out of me, like others have said. It was just like, it was the place where I could put both the grief and the joy and the awe, the moments of whatever was happening. It was just a place to capture them. Is that about what you wanted to hear, Marianne?
Yeah, unless you had anything else to add about how it benefits caregiving or maybe everybody's already said that.
Yeah, probably. For me, it benefited in that I had a place to put it and then I could move on with my regular day. But every day I would come home and write in my journal, and often there was a poem there.
Okay. So are you ready to read us one of your poems now?
Sure, if you would like. Okay, this is a poem. This was just a moment when my mother was in a care facility, and I would often go there just feeling really bereft. Oh, this is so hard, just being her daughter and seeing her the way she is. But this was a moment where things turned around a little bit. It's called The Kingdom of Children. I lead my mother to a seat in the gazebo where my friends' children, all dark curls, glossy skin, play with dusty plastic horses once stowed in her basement. I stroke her arm, watch her lips relax as if the children are hers. Kneeling, they stare up at her. Strips of light illuminate their faces. I wonder what they see. An old woman, skirt turned up at the waist, stain on her blouse from breakfast, hair matted from napping, logic lost along the way. She says, "Giddy up," taps her foot, claps her hand, whispers a soft little neigh. The children draw close to sit with her a while. Her nonsense makes them whinny, buck, and smile.
Sweet. Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Looking forward to hearing more poems.
Oh, yes. Margaret, are you ready?
Sure, I'll read the poem from my anthology, and it's called Drugging My Mother. My hand shook when I took the bag of drugs delivered that night. The moon was red. My mother's gut clenched, bred an infection, dispersed invasive seeds of rage. In her brain, a chainsaw shredded reason to ribbons, incited limbs to insurrection. Hospice gave clear directions. Don't worry about tomorrow, today. But that day, electrons in her head split atomic bonds of mother, daughter. I could hide knives, scissors, but not my fear, which she could smell clearly. Lorazepam, Seroquel, haloperidol. I ferried the dark waters of my mother, tossed futile chemicals into her currents.
Beautiful. Sue?
Okay. This is a typical day at the nursing home.
Mm.
You might identify. Just another day. I pull boxer shorts from my bag, rip open the plastic, get busy writing room 107 in the waistbands, put them folded into your drawer. Our anniversary is coming, I say. How many? You've lost the word for years. 25. I thirst for champagne sipped from crystal goblets. Will I be there, you ask? Oh, love, do you remember holding hands atop white candlelit tablecloths, sharing bites of chocolate cake, licking each other's lips? You fiddle with your pants, get up. I have to pee. You run away. I gaze outside as winter rain streaks the glass with icy tears.
Thank you. Dan?
Thank you. This is a poem from my anthology, Bringing Art to Life, which also has some essays and other stories about our program that we created in Dad's memory, which is a program of art therapy for college students to interact with people living with dementia and form friendships with them. This is one that's titled, You Asked Me If I Remember. And one of the things that I've tried to do very gently and with a lot of nuance and a lot of respect is to empathetically enter the world of someone who's living with dementia, thinking about all of those thousands of people that I've seen with it and gotten to know, and also my dad and others. So I tread very lightly and gently, but this is from the perspective of somebody with dementia, with a loved one who's asking them if I remember them. So it's called You Ask Me If I Remember. You ask me if I remember you. You tell me. I cannot call your name. I feel that I've seen your face, though I can't be sure. The lines between maybe me and maybe you are blurred. Is this that or that this? I don't know sometimes. Yet I see you now and I feel comfortable, restful. I seem to feel joy here with you. I know that someone knows me, someone who won't forget, who won't turn away. I'm not ashamed here. I'm not afraid. Fractured, I feel whole with you. Needy, I feel I have something to give. I feel you are open to receiving my gift. I meet something kind and good, something loving and selfless. I'm sure of this somehow. I feel beautiful. I remember beauty and innocence and laughter and running through meadow grasses and skies of summer, warmly winging. A new song seems old again, dancingly young old. Feet touching each other, dusting the floor, a mysterious making of movement. With you, the air seems to hold me safely in rooms where I've wandered. I can be still here with you. I don't have to look for words. But I can't call your name. I feel that I've seen your face, though I can't be sure. You ask me if I remember you? You tell me.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. Sherri.
I learned from my mother that it was important to be in the here and now. That's what it helps a lot. So for my mother's 80th birthday, I wanted to take her swimming with me, but I had to get her a bathing suit. So this is our experience, swimming in the rain. With my hands on her still strong shoulders, I steer my mother to the discount rack so she won't complain about the prices. The sales girl comes over wearing an Oregon Ducks t-shirt, her smartphone squeezed into the back pocket of her rhinestone jeans. Cracking her gum, she asks my mother in slow motion, "Can I help you?" My mother is slow as rain, a creaky, twisted bicycle chain. Back at the car, she lifts the black bathing suit and folds it on her lap. "I look like a fat seal in that thing," she says. And I tell her, "And I'm a seagull crashing into the surf." It's been raining for hours, both of us swimming in uncharted waters. Thank you.
Did you have another one to read for us?
I do have one. It's in What Flies Away, which is my first collection. And it won the North Carolina Poet Laureate Award. And I think it was because the poet laureate at the time had been a caregiver himself. So he definitely related to it. But let me find this poem. Here it is. It's called The Chase. We'd try to catch her before she got to the door, dressed in layers of sweaters or nothing at all, but socks and a bra. She'd call out like a kid, "I'm going sailing with Dad." Back then, I didn't know to smile and wave, slip out the back, meet her at the door. "Why, Anne," she would have said, the lake evaporating from her mind. "Come in, it's so nice to see you." My father tried to reason with her. "Dear, it's cold out. The lake is miles away. Your father won't be there. He was buried years ago." She'd raise her hand to her mouth. "No one told me he died," as tears sprang to her eyes. I'd lead her back to her room where clothes lay scattered like lost feathers. For a while, she read my face as if it were a map to her world. At dinner, my father and I exchanged looks as she poured pepper into her water, stirred it with a fork. Something funny is going on around here, she said. Her meat and peas grew cold. When we moved her to the home, I propped a smile on my lips, learned to speak a new language. On a weekend outing, she announced, I'm never going back to that prison. I said, how about we do something fun? She clapped her hands. Let's go for a ride. I drove her down dark roads back to the home. In the car, she squeezed my hand. You're the only one I trust. These days, words escape her. Unable to walk, she sits for hours, her legs still as some forgotten thought, head bobbing, the weight of her chin pulls her sideways until her trunk rests against the edge of her chair. What I'd give for another chance to chase her down the drive. When I caught her, I'd slip my hand in hers, smile for real, and say, let's go sailing on this fine day.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anne.
Sure.
Margaret?
Okay, I would like to read a poem by my co-editor, Jim Kokis, and it's called The Shave. I really like this poem because has a hands-on caregiving, and I love the ending of this poem. The Shave. Holding out my left hand, I dispense a small billowing cloud into its center. Tilting my father's head a little, dipping into the pure white puff, I begin to work it into his coarse gray stubble. After some careful deliberation on the starting point, I pull the razor across his slack cheek, but without tension, the blade stutters and skips. This will not work. So I ask him, show him how to make a face. See, like this. My chin jutting forward and up like the bow of a ship. He copies my form and the razor glides through the white foam. Next, we steer the ship left and then right, moving across an ocean of loss until we are done. My father touches his cheek and smiles at the renewed smoothness of his face, and I realize that sometimes memory is less about the act and more about trust. What someone knows when they know nothing else.
Thank you. Great. Sue, do you have another one for us?
Sure, got a million of them. I keep switching which I'm gonna do. This was when my husband was at the first place that he stayed. Friday afternoon. Behind the nursing home, the grass rolls lush and steep to greenhouses and gardens, a red barn, a farmhouse. Far below, the ocean sparkles blue and silver in pale April sun. I lead him down the driveway, stumbling and shuffling, his footsteps off the beat. I hold his boneless hand, urge him to sit on the lawn. As sunlight burns our cheeks, he begins to shake, to weep. Beauty brings no comfort. Not green, not red, not blue, not gold upon our skin. When can I go home, he asks. I kiss his bristly cheeks, match our wedding bands. A robin sings nearby.
And Dan, do you have another one for us?
Yeah, I do. We were talking a little bit about the pandemic a minute ago and talking about Allie being one of those students that came through the pandemic, and also Anne's daughter who's graduating. So I wrote a lot of poetry, as we probably all did during that time. And one of the saddest things that I heard about so much, and I didn't have a family member in a facility at that time, but a lot of my patients did, and was that they couldn't visit. And so there were all these stories about people going to windows and motioning through windows and stuff like that, putting hands to the windows. It just tears your heart out. This is a poem about a care partner going to visit through the window his loved one. And these are spouses, I assume. There would be spouses. And the poem is called where the forest meets the sky. And this is a rhyming poem. Part the curtains, dear, I see you. Put your hand up to the pane. I am with you standing out here in the rain. Please don't worry, my heart hears you through this window. I'll explain when the axis of the earth aligns again. I'm praying you'll believe me, though you can't hear what I say. It's for your own good that I must stay away. But the situation grieves me, and I'm living for the day I can hold your hand and sing our blues away. So just look into my spirit through the window of my eye. We can see that distant sunset if we try. Listen closely. Do you hear it? When I ask if we can fly in our hearts to where the forest meets the sky.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And Sherri, do you have one more for us?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I just wanted to show you the cover of my
Yes.
book. It's actually a painting of my mother's, and my mother, I told you my mother is an artist. When you love someone so much, you'll do anything. And I love my mother so much. And so what I wanted to do is I asked, this is called A Joy to See, and I asked 27 of the most prominent poets in Oregon to write a poem in response to her paintings. And 2 poets here are in the audience that I see, wrote some poems. And I also wrote a poem too. And it's the title of this book. Stealing Flowers from the Neighbors. Oh, these are the flowers that I stole. Stealing flowers from the neighbors. No dark sunglasses, no hood over my head, no scissors, shopping bag slung over my shoulder. I slide behind bushes, hurt by brambles, yank and snap, rip. No worry or rush or hush from the birds. Squirrels, too busy collecting nuts, don't stop on the lawn to judge. Dandelion seeds fill the air like dust. A silent sneeze, a cough caught in my throat. I crawl under towering weeds and hedges, wedge myself between rocks and prickly thorns. I do not feel the scraping of my knees or the bee sting, burn of the sun on my cheeks, heat on my hatless head. Stealing flowers from the neighbors, I could only think of you in your hospice bed, your weary head, waiting for me to appear. Thank you.
What we can do is have all of you go one more round. How does that sound? Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I will give up my time and I'll just ask a question that maybe
Okay.
each of you can answer before or after you read a poem. And I'm just curious what the starting point for some of your poems are. If it's a memory, an image, a phrase, a photo, piece of artwork, just what got you into either this poem or like most of your poems?
Sherri, Sherri, you want to go first?
Oh, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No, I don't think so.
I was just gonna say tremendous pain. It's so painful. And I think it was the worst experience of my life. And I feel like when I write, there's some catharsis, but it's also a gift to my mom and to honor her. So I would say out of pain comes joy at times. So thank you for asking, Anne.
Sure. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah. Margaret, did you want to say something?
Yeah, similar to what Sherri is saying, the pain, the confusion. When I wrote that poem, Drugging My Mother, that is a really dark poem. And I was terrified. Hospice we were able to finally get my mom more of the care she needed because I was able to get her on hospice, though she wasn't actively dying. And we had to stabilize her because her behavior was becoming violent and terribly problematic. And they gave me these drugs, and they gave me some very basic guidelines for how to begin. And I was like, what? I can't do this. This is my mother. So it was a terrible moment for me. It was a very dark moment. I was very frightened. And I'm not sure. Yeah, pharmaceuticals they're wonderful tools, but it was just such a moment for me. And I would like to add something. Caregiving was really hard on me, and to some extent I did have some health consequences as a result of it. But I would like to say it made me a better person. It
Mhm.
changed me, and I feel like I wouldn't be who I am. I couldn't have the compassion that I have for people going through this journey, the compassion for not just the caregivers, but it's hard for us, of course, but it's so hard for the person going through that. It's heartbreaking to see somebody you care so much about so confused, and it's, yeah, so pain and confusion. That's the short answer.
Thank you. Sue,
Thank
you
you.
wanted to add something?
Yeah, they gave my husband a very similar cocktail of medications, and it was horrifying. In some ways, it took him away from me because he just became a zombie with all the drugs. But yeah, his behavior was getting beyond. For me, sometimes it's pain. The last one I read was hoping, trying so hard to make me feel better, and nothing would. He was just brokenhearted. And that broke my heart too. But a lot of times for me, it's a phrase that comes to mind, an image, or something that happens that I just want to capture that little moment. And that gets me started. Doesn't take much.
Anne, did you want to
What,
say something?
what I did, what a great question. And I agree with I feel the same way that you all do about it. People that know me know that during my dad's illness and afterwards, I've been struggling and thinking about and pondering this idea of personhood and what makes us a person, what makes a selfhood. Its persistence in Alzheimer's and other dementias, and its expression through the creative arts and our ability to build a relationship around that. And as dad, I don't believe people can lose their personhood. That's my feeling. I think that it's still there. We just have to know how to reach it. But I felt I was losing mine when I saw dad going through this. And I just think we're so interconnected. And so the relational aspect of this, for me, things that bring me back to selfhood, things that connect me deeply, whether it's a rock that I've observed on a hike, or whether it's a bird flying through the air, or whether it's a person, things that are relational make me want to write. And so something touches a chord, and I'll jot something down and I'll go explore that later. So it's that relational, that personhood, that maybe the connecting at a deep level, the soulfulness of something makes me want to write.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have one more poem for us, Dan?
I do. This along those lines of what I just said. This is a poem that was one of my first ones that I wrote as Dad was really passing away in hospice. And I was struggling with this loss of self, this personhood. I was struggling in this dark place. I felt like I was losing mine. And I could hear him saying the following words. And so I call this Remember. This is him speaking to me, or anyone. Remember who you are, my child, who you were born to be. Let love be law in mind and heart. Let life be charity. If bandaged, begging hands assail your palisades of calm, let labor bring tranquility. Let healing be its balm. When death itself so stealthily advances through your days, let quiet faith be your resolve. Let living be your praise. Then, when my spirit and my flesh unknit and I am gone, within your heart the finest part of me continues on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Sue, one more?
I'm gonna lighten the mood a little bit. Dan, you got me. Memory care. The aides serve ice cream every day, and every day the residents are surprised at this new treat. Handed bowls of vanilla scooped from tubs, they stare at the white mounds floating there. Some poke it with dirty fingers, spilling ice cream over the sides, while others bend and lick it like a cat. Some just set it down. One man, we'll call him Frank, with just one tooth, grabs a handful, makes a snowball, and throws it at the TV set, where it slithers down the screen over Haas on the old Bonanza show. Bingo, cries an old lady with an ice cream mustache.
Great.
There's so many different elements of, remind me of my days of working in the nursing home.
I don't know what to do with it.
That's so funny. Margaret.
Yes. Okay. So one of the contributors to the anthology is here, and she didn't volunteer to read. So I'm going to read this poem of Anne Farley. When I got this poem in my submissions, I want this poem, and it's called On the Sunset Eastbound. We leave earlier than necessary to go to the neurologist's office. I lie about the appointment time because nothing slows an elderly person like being rushed. We snake the sloping curves to the tunnel into Portland, traffic thick but moving, until abruptly it isn't. We stop, and I calculate the distance left, the chances of finding parking near an elevator, the hallways we need to walk, how often he might shuffle to a stop to ask a question or gaze out a window. Time trickles while we sit like rocks in a river. I am careful not to fidget or sigh, but he leans forward, examines the cars, the hillsides, the tall trees, the downward twist of the road. Then he focuses on me, his eyebrows arch. He says, "This is good. I know this place." Yay, Anne.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I got up a moment ago and your anthology is one of my bedside books. I pick it up, like you were saying, you leaf through and you read here and there. And that's upstairs. And I thought, I can't leave this that long to go find it. You know? I think Sue alluded to this. We have to keep our sense of humor at times and see those moments of joy or the funny bits. I was there one time when a caregiver was helping a lady and said, "Let me have your arm." And the woman with Alzheimer's said, "I'm very attached to it." There are moments like that that are just fabulous. We have to be present for them.
Absolutely.
Sherri, did you want to finish for us?
The way I write, I think people who know me is that my writing is funny, but it's dark. Here we go. Rummaging. Off the bus, my mother struts in front of me in a rush to the bank. She waves her finger at the teller, counting bills behind the window. "Where's the chubby one?" she says. I stand behind her and tug her arm. "Stop it," she says. She pulls away, rummaging through her black leather fanny pack for her driver's license. I know she won't find it. "They know me here," she yells. Behind the window, the manager nods to me. He says to her, "It's okay, Mrs. Levine." I turn around and face the security guard, the taser on his belt. He doesn't flinch. Has she done this before? I feel sweat dripping under my arms and into my bra. Everything is red and hot, like the inside of a mouth screaming.
Mm,
Thank you.
yeah, that's
Very good.
beautiful. Thank you, Sherri. Okay, so this concludes our readings, and I want to thank everyone for attending Aging and Amazing's Books and Chit Chat with All's Authors. We'd love to see you at our next book discussion on Tuesday, May 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, when we meet Vicky Tapia, who is the author of Somebody Stole My Iron, a family memoir of dementia inspired by her caregiving years for parents who both had dementia. You may learn more and register for the event in the Books and Chit Chat channel in the Aging and Amazing community. We have another event coming up as part of our All Authors Live series on May 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. 4 of our authors will discuss LGBTQ+ caregiver concerns. You can find details and the registration link on our website, allsauthors.com. I also invite you to become among the first to know everything new at All's Authors as a subscriber to our weekly newsletter. You can sign up at allsauthors.com, then check your inbox each week for our news, introducing our latest author, podcast, special events, and more. And be sure to visit our blog, podcast, and shop at allsauthors.com to find more resources for your dementia journey. You can also find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where we share a wealth of resources. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much for being here.